Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Mamikonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NASAR. Thank you for making time in your day to be with us. Or if you're watching later, thank you for making time whenever you're watching it. This program today is presented by the Nasser Kalust Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues, the Mashtots Chair in Armenian Studies at Harvard University, the Society for Armenian Studies, SAS, and Research on Armenian Architecture, RAA. We're grateful as ever for the support of the Gulbenkian Foundation and for the opportunity to collaborate with such excellent entities as the Mashtots Chair, SAS, and RAA. In part, today's event is a way of marking the 4-year anniversary of the outbreak of the 44-day war in Artsakh, as well as the 1-year anniversary of the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh that was, frankly, its foreseeable sequel. Unsurprisingly, I guess we've had quite a number of programs over the past 4 years on the threat to Armenian cultural heritage in Artsakh, and not merely threats, because the actual destruction is occurring, to say nothing of the rewriting of the history of those monuments that remain to strip them of their Armenian identity. For many of us, probably, I think, myself included, the 2020 war or even the final destruction of the Juha Khachkars almost 20 years ago was the wake-up call to the intentions of Baku. But of course, there were those who were ringing alarms and taking steps much earlier, steps to document in a systematic way Armenian cultural monuments within the borders of the Republic of Azerbaijan, including Artsakh. For that reason, and for many others, we all owe a great debt to the late Armen Hakhnazarian and Samvel Karapetian, who founded and led RAA for many years, and indeed to all who have contributed to the work of RAA over the years, for the tireless, fearless, and truly heroic work they have done to document Armenian monuments located outside of the borders of Armenia. I really don't have any adequate words for the importance of what they've accomplished. It's quite monumental. But I would like to ask Talin Harutyunyan of the RAA board to say a few more words about this fantastic organization before I introduce our main speakers today. Talin.
Thank you, Mark, for your introduction and for moderating this panel today. Christina, Rachel, and Rafi, it's an honor to be on this panel with you. So Research on Armenian Architecture is a nonprofit organization founded 55 years ago, primarily on the principles of preservation, the preservation of a people and a culture combating historical revisionism. The concept of historical revisionism and cultural genocide isn't new. What we know of history today, we know in part based on cultural artifacts, architecture, and monuments that paint a picture of a time and a people that populated lands long ago. And so RAA's founder, the late Dr. Armen Hakhnazarian, who was both an architect and a professor, together with his group of supporters, recognized early on that this concept of changing history, rewriting what we know of a culture by erasing that culture's significance or perhaps its very existence in a region by eradicating their churches, monasteries, bridges, graveyards, and other funerary structures is a powerful tool. In fact, it's a scary tool in the hands of a modernist nation that is hungry for power and looking to consciously create a new history for itself and its people, for instance, by masquerading and appropriating historical Armenian churches and monuments as Albanian in origin. So in 1969, in an effort to avert the Republic of Turkey from using this powerful revisionism tool as a means to perpetrate cultural genocide and usurp historical Armenian lands, Dr. Hakhnazarian took on the role of a real-life Indiana Jones. At his own peril, he embarked on architectural, historical treasure expeditions, excavating and cataloging existing churches, monuments, khachkars, tombstones, bridges, and other Armenian artifacts, many of which are now gone in what is considered then and now foreign territory, historical Armenia, or modern-day Turkey, and later expanding to Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Iran. Since its humble beginnings, RAA Foundation now spans globally with its recently acquired main office in Yerevan, complete with a team of more than 20 staff members, a second office in LA, a rich archive filled with over 650,000 digitized images and maps outlining each of RAA's findings with precise locations, 3D CAD modelings of important Armenian churches and monuments, and various volumes of published works and books outlining all of our findings. The 3D CAD modelings have been particularly impactful as they have allowed us to recreate already destroyed churches and monuments and appreciate them as they were always intended. But our plight against revisionism is ongoing, as we all know, and we have opened and offered our archives and database to various organizations, legal groups, scholars, student groups, international courts, including the ICC, in order to provide evidence of deliberate destruction by Turkey and Azerbaijan. But our database really, it does more than that. It provides insight into a world that once existed, adding to our communal understanding of history in the region. We're very proud of our work and our accomplishments. This includes the tens of thousands of man-hours put into drawing, photographing, surveying, cataloging historical and significant Armenian churches and architecture and artifacts, as well as our involvement in the renovation and the restoration of 7 historical churches and monasteries in Armenia, Artsakh, Syria, and Iran, notifying UNESCO of the destruction of churches and khachkars in the Nakhichevan region, which unfortunately have fallen prey to white genocide by Azerbaijan. I should add, however, that fortunately, as it relates to Nakhichevan, prior to succumbing to ruin in the hands of the Azeris, we had already cataloged the khachkars and tombstones in the region, some dating back to 1000 AD, and therefore, while they no longer remain intact, they are, in fact, forever recorded in history. Of relevance now is the work undertaken in the Azerbaijan and Artsakh region by Dr. Hakhnazarian and the late Samvel Karapetian, who was a monumentalist who, very much like Dr. Hakhnazarian, dedicated his life to the preservation of Armenian cultural heritage during the Soviet era and joined RAA in the early 1980s. This collection of work began even before the First Karabakh War, and today evidences the perpetual and purposeful attack and cleansing of Armenians and Armenian cultural heritage in the region, and in particular in the aftermath of the 44-day war. It's a collection of work that has allowed us to once again turn to UNESCO in hopes of saving whatever Armenian architectural heritage remains in the Artsakh region. Sadly, to date, UNESCO and other group representatives have been turned away at the Armenia-Artsakh border without permission by the Azeris to enter Artsakh, leaving all Armenian cultural relics and churches at continued risk. This is a collection of work that enables us to hold Azerbaijan accountable for any destruction and appropriation in the Artsakh region, and it's a collection of work that accounts for years and hours of labor, a culmination we're very proud of, that will safeguard Armenian cultural heritage in a region come what may, and hopefully stand in the way of a revisionist retelling of Artsakh's history and people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Talin. So our focus today indeed is on the publication Azerbaijan and the Destruction of Armenian Civilization by Samvel Karapetian, published by Research on Armenian Architecture and now available in English. And I'm pasting a link in the Zoom chat, which takes you to the information on this book on the RA website, including the ability to download the PDF. And I believe physical copies of the book will become available. And if you can visit their website or contact us or them to find out more information about this. We have with us today the volume's English language editors, Dr. Rachel Gashgarian, Professor of History at Lafayette College, Rafi Karapetian, an architectural engineer and the co-director of the RAA Foundation, and Dr. Christina Maranzi, who's Mashtot's chair in Armenian Studies at Harvard University. 3 people well accomplished in their fields and well able to acquaint us with this book and the issues it addresses. Following their presentations, we invite your questions. Please use the Zoom Q&A function. And now I believe we turn to Baron Rafi.
Բարև ձեզի, բոլոր ներկաներին եւ ունգընտիրներին, շնորհակալ եմ Մարկ կազմակերպելու այս հավաքը եւ ներկայացնելու այս կարևոր գիրքը։ Ես արագ ներկայացնեմ գրքի նախապատմությունը։ Գիրքը առաջին հրատարակությունը եղել է 2017 թվականին եւ այդ կոչվում է Azerbaijan out of civilization եւ անշուշտ այդ ժամանակ ներկայացված է եղել հիմնականում անցած տարիների, այսինքն 1994-ի հրադադարից հետո մինչև 2017 թվականը Ադրբեջանի հսկողության տակ գտնվող տարածքներում հայկական հուշարձանների ոչնչացման ընթացքը։
Rafi, guzes hima tarkmanem kiç.
Okay.
Okay, so Rafi's speaking in Armenian. He also speaks great English, but he feels more comfortable speaking in Armenian. So Rafi is just saying thank you to everyone for being here. And he's also giving us the backstory of the book. So the initial book was published in 2017, written by Samvel Karapetian. And it was then called Azerbaijan Out of Civilization. And in this book, it was a deep study with photographs and text that basically showed from 1994 up until that time, the ways in which the Azeri government had destroyed much Armenian architectural heritage in the lands that were under control of the Republic of Azerbaijan.
Եվ արդեն 2020 թվականից հետո անհրաժեշտություն եղավ, որովհետև Ադրբեջանը արդեն նոր տարածքներ էր գրավել եւ այդ նոր տարածքներում նույն ձևի հստակ էր, որ սկսելու էր հայկական հուշարձանների ոչնչացման իր քաղաքականությունը։
So then basically it became evident after Azerbaijan had conquered more lands in which there were Armenian vestiges of Armenian architectural heritage and actively used Armenian architecture, that the state had again started to destroy those things. So in 2020 there was a decision, or after 2020, after the initial war, there was the goal of sort of revisiting this book and amplifying it with more evidence.
Եվ ընթացքում արդեն փաստերը գալիս էին, փաստերը մենք կարողանում էինք տեսնել ամենուրեք, որ Ադրբեջանը այո շարունակում է իր քաղաքականությունը, եւ հետեւաբար գրքի ամենակարևոր նպատակը ոչ թե այն էր, որ ներկայացնել միայն Ադրբեջանի վանդալիզմը աշխարհին, այլ այդ ներկայացնելով փորձել փրկել մնացածը, որ Ադրբեջանը կանգնեցնի այն ընթացքը, որով ինքը աշխատում է եւ փորձել փրկել այդ մնացածը, եւ հետեւաբար շատ կարեւոր էր գիրքը ներկայացնել աշխարհին, որպես նաեւ ավելի չեզոք աչքով եւ նաեւ փաստերով, որպեսզի նրանք էլ կարողանային ճնշեին Ադրբեջանի վրա, որ դադարեցներ այդ իր քաղաքականությունը։
So just with even doing the initial steps of research, it became clear that there was plenty of proof that Azerbaijan was continuing to erase Armenian cultural heritage in lands that it had occupied. And so the goal was not only to provide more proof of this, but also to make the book more available to a wider audience, so that they could not only understand the ways in which Azerbaijan was erasing and destroying Armenian cultural heritage in the region, but also such that there might be an opportunity for people to put pressure on the government of Azerbaijan to save what was left.
Եվ այստեղ էր նաև փնդրդուքը այն մասնագետներին, որոնք կկարողանան գիրքը այնպես խմբագրել, որ նաև հասանելի լինի գիտական աշխարհին եւ տարբեր նորմերով, համաշխարհային ընդունված նորմերով լինի, եւ ես շատ ուրախ եմ եւ հպարտ եւ նաեւ ինձ համար կարեւոր էր, որ այստեղ ընդգրկվեցին կամավոր Քրիստինեն եւ Ռեյչելը, եւ ինձ համար շատ կարեւոր փորձառություն էր, որ միասին կարողացանք այնպես անել, որ նաեւ ընդունելի լինի տարբեր ազգերի համար որոշ փոփոխություններով ավելի մանրամասն երևի Ռեյչելը եւ Քրիստինեն գխոսեն այն մասին, այնտեղ ավելացվեց նաեւ վերջում այն նոր ավերումները որպես նմուշ այդ գործունեության շարունակականության եւ ինչպես նաեւ Ռեյչելի եւ Քրիստինեի առաջարկով փոխվեց վերնագիրը ավելի հնչեղ դարձնելու համար.
And so in working on this project, it became another goal in order to make sure that it could be read by wider audiences and in specific intellectuals who live throughout the world. There was a conversation sort of between all of us, between Baron Jora, between Jora, Rafi, Christina, and I, about maybe shifting some of the language a little bit so that it sort of conform to the standards of academic work, sort of loosely understood. And in part, that's why the title of the book also was changed from Azerbaijan Out of Civilization to Azerbaijan and the Destruction of Armenian Cultural Heritage. So Rafi was saying that it was, a pleasure and important to work together. I think for all of us it was, and the book now, it reads more like a standard academic book. Of course, it maintains all of its dedication to a strict sort of analysis of the proof that exists of what the state of Azerbaijan has done, but written maybe in a way that makes it usable by both intellectuals and international bodies, so it can become more useful, basically. And so we worked on that together, and I think that it's what Rafi was saying is that I think it's a good, and we'll talk maybe more specifically about some of the language, but that I think it turned out very well. And I don't know if it's clear to everyone, Mark was sharing the PDF, but it's also so generous on the part of RAA to make this available online. Even in that, I mean, this is me talking now, even in that, I mean, I really admire the RAA for doing so much work and then making it available intentionally so that it can have a wider audience. So it's not usual that people share books like this for free, basically, right? So I think it speaks to the goals of the RAA. Rafi called Christina and I volunteers, but I know that there are so many people that volunteer a lot of their time and energy. And I know that there are a lot of people that give a lot of money to RAA so that it can maybe not a lot. They probably could use some donations. So don't give some more money to RAA. But it's amazing. The goal of this organization really is to do hard work and make it available to a wide audience. As to echo Rafi's sentiment, to try to save Armenian architecture.
Գիրքը, ինչպես Ռեյչելն էր ասեց, այո, բաց է եւ մենք դրա PDF-ը կա, կարող ենք ներբեռնել մեր կայքեչից, որը միակ նպատակն է կանգնեցնել Ադրբեջանի այս քաղաքականությունը եւ նաեւ տպագրված վիճակում ունենք օրինակներ, բազմաթիվ օրինակներ եւ արդեն շուտով կսկսենք նվիրել տարբեր գրադարանների եւ եթե ցանկեր կան, մարդիկ կան, որոնք հիմա նայում են եւ գուզեն գրադարաններում լինել այդ գիրքը, մենք սիրով նաև այդ գրադարաններին իրենց միջոցով, իրենց հնարավորություններով կարող ենք նվիրել.
So Rafi is just saying on the website, you can see links. It's not just to this volume, but to many other volumes that are published by RAA, but also that the organization does have physical printed copies. And the goal is actually to send most of those physical printed copies to libraries throughout the world. And Rafi's saying if anyone on the Zoom would like to include those books in their library or in a library with which they're familiar, please email either Rafi or Jora. I believe Mark will be sharing that information, and they're happy to send it to libraries.
Շնորհակալություն ինձ այս կանը thank you very much.
I should mention that I neglected to introduce Jora Manusharian, who's also with us today, and perhaps from whom we will hear during the discussion. Jora is the head of RAA in the United States, and I'm sure we'll hear from him later. Now I believe we will turn to Christina Maranzi. Yes.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody here. I'm just going to share my screen. So hold on one second while I get it going. I'm going to view and slideshow. So what I wanted to do is just offer a short presentation of the book and of the things that I take away from it. But before doing that, I just want to say how grateful I have been to work with Jora, Rafi, and of course Rachel on editing the text. It was a chance to read through this incredibly important book once again and make it accessible, we hope, to a wider audience. RAA, I think Tallinn had said, is doing heroic work, has done heroic work. Looking over this book again this morning in preparation for the presentation, I was reminded at how hard it must have been and how hard it must be for the people at RAA to both document but also see the destruction firsthand. And that work, which has to be painful, I'm so grateful for it, because without the documentation, we can't do historical interpretation. So I want to put my hat on here for a minute as a historian of art and architecture and speak about this book and the other publications too. Just one more general point: the other publications too that I made such great use of during the 2020 war. I think all of us, when the war broke out, well, many of us turned right to RAA to look at the publications and learn from them. And we're just so grateful that they exist. The photographs, the drawings, the transcriptions of inscriptions, and so forth. And so just turning to this present volume, I just want to go through a few of the things that really stuck out for me as being of particular importance. Again, as a scholar, as much as an advocate for Armenian architecture. So maybe it's really just weird to start with sundials, but I happen to be a big fan of sundials, Armenian sundials. And so I did want to start with that. So the book has photographs of a lot of before and afters, which are, again, painful to look at, but also give you a sense of the incredibly rich culture of Artsakh and Nakhchivan, and the ways in which it connects to the rest of Armenian culture anywhere and everywhere, both regarding medieval and early modern material. And sundials really speak to that. There is something incredibly potent, I think, about the destruction of a sundial. I think if I were, a cultural historian, I could really think about, this and interpret this deliberate effacement of a sundial, which you see in the image below, in a way that maybe speaks volumes about the perpetrators. But I'm giving you this example to start with as just a kind of signal or kind of signature RAA showing the before and afters and what's happened to the Armenian material in Artsakh. And there is more and more of it. So page 34, again, effacement of inscriptions and destruction of crosses. And another thing I want to say from the point of view of a historian of Armenian art and architecture is that there is, in my field, a growing interest in early modern culture, 16th century, 17th century, 18th century. This material is crucial to that. It's barely been studied from a kind of interpretive point of view. So to have this documentation is extraordinary. One is so grateful. At the same time, it's devastating that the monuments themselves are gone, because of course, in order to do the work of historical interpretation, you ideally, necessarily need the buildings to be there so that you can inspect them. The work that the volume documents also the destruction of medieval sites, like the one you see here. And again, with my art historian and architectural historian cap on, I just want to say that these buildings are understudied. There needed to be more work on them to understand their place in the landscape, to understand their masonry, their designs. And the opportunity to do that work is lessening, if not, completely disappeared at this point. But at least because of RAA, we have this documentation and we have the drawings. Turning again to the early modern, one thing that we find in Artsakh, or found in Artsakh, was a real richness of monastic buildings, whether it's Dadivank, of course, but also Charek Monastery in northern Artsakh from the 17th century. And again, speaking about early modern, there was, and maybe there will be in the future, but there was a wonderful opportunity to think about early modern monasteries. Again, an understudied subject, but one that is increasingly interesting for graduate students. What happened in these monasteries? What did they do? What did they copy? What were they learning? What did they think about? How did they talk about Armenian church doctrine? And how did they live? So these documents give us a tremendous amount to think about, but they also inventory tremendous loss not just of the physical sites, but also of the potential for really diving into the history of the region. And we can talk about that as well with regard to inscriptions and khachkars and tombstones, which you see here from the monastery of Charek, as well as modern tombstones. As we all know, these are tremendously important, not just as testimonies of individuals and individual lives or the lives of families, but as modern historical records. So we get all kinds of information from these tombstones: names, family members, dates. So the destruction of these objects means the destruction of a modern history of the site. And again, the records that RAA has produced, the inscriptions they have transcribed from these sites, means that this memory is not totally lost. And I can't say enough about the tragedy of losing sculpted portals that are fascinating for their sculptural motifs and for how they connect to surrounding cultures and how creative these designs are. It's devastating to see this destruction, but it's also a chance to at least do some basic work of thinking about these sites in context. I mean, a really notorious building, actually one of two that you see here, Tsar, has been recorded here in this volume, Azerbaijan, the Destruction of Armenian Civilization, but also elsewhere in other of RAA's publications. And as you may know now, this site is completely destroyed, as was reported on Caucasus Heritage Watch. So this site, which is was a school that incorporated an Azerbaijani school that incorporated fragments of Armenian tombstones and inscriptions and khachkars and carving. So the destruction of this, the wholesale destruction of this school means not only the destruction of individual monuments, inscriptions, tombstones, but also of a kind of spoliation, of a practice of spoliation. There are many layers here of destruction, which again would, I suppose, benefit from a kind of cultural historical interpretation. But for the moment, I think we can just say that the opportunity to do firsthand work on this site and to explore the artifacts that are embedded in the walls is now gone. And just another photograph, another page from the volume showing what was, at least up until a few months ago, possible to look at. I've talked about early modern architecture. I think you can see here the really exciting, to me, use of stalactite motifs here, or muqarnas motifs above the inscription. It would be so important to study these in relation to early modern architecture in the surrounding regions. Artsakh really has amazing examples of this, but now you can see, as the case is for much of the book, now completely destroyed. The book ends, or towards the end of it, are a series of pages about Nakhchivan, which will show us some extraordinary buildings, and of course the khachkars, and line drawings of the khachkars. So it is an extraordinary book for what it communicates, which is of tremendous loss, but also tremendous creativity and richness on the part of the Armenian culture that once stood in Artsakh and Nakhchivan. And I know I speak for Rachel too, I was honored to have been asked to edit a volume that is doing something so important in terms of recording the memory of Armenian culture in the region and communicating that memory and its unlawful destruction to the larger world. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop share.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Now we turn to Rachel.
I think what I'm going to try to do is put this work and this book into larger context. So I think, Mark, we said that we wanted the program to run about 50 minutes. Is that correct? So that then people can ask questions?
Yes,
okay.
More or less.
I'll try not to talk more than 15 minutes. I'm going to just speak, and then, because I do have something prepared, but then maybe I'll show some images afterwards, if possible. Okay. So basically what I want to talk about is sort of linking. So RAA does work obviously on Azerbaijan, but it also does work, does and is undertaking current projects in Western Armenia, right? So I'm going to try to link our understanding of this cultural destruction, cultural heritage destruction, and quote unquote preservation in the modern Republic of Turkey with what's happening today in Azerbaijan. So, all right, so the Armenian cemetery of Jura or Julfa in Nakhchivan, and this may be a refresher for many of you, many people may know much of this, but I just think it's important to put it into the context. With its medieval khachkars, 2,000 were still extant in the 1980s, was intentionally destroyed by the Republic of Azerbaijan in 2006. Simon Marrakyan undertook important research and writing on this topic for the online arts magazine Hyperallergic, alerting the world to this tragedy of erasure. A more recent article by Avidis Bedros Hadjian, also in Hyperallergic, shares that 98% of Armenian cultural heritage in Nakhchivan, inhabited by Armenians since the 2nd century BCE, has been destroyed. This analysis is largely based on a newly released report by Caucasus Heritage Watch, which identified 108 medieval and early modern Armenian monasteries, churches, and cemeteries in Nakhichevan that were completely destroyed between 1997 and 2001, a, quote, striking portrait of cultural erasure that in its surgical precision, totality, and surreptitiousness has few parallels. As our speaker, Christina Maranzi, has explained, we know well what happened in Julfa in Nakhichevan. We know what happened to the Church of the Mother of God in Jebrail and the Armenian cemetery in the village of Medz Tagher or Büyük Talar. Both were completely scrubbed from the landscape using earth-moving equipment like bulldozers. And we know what happened to the Cathedral of Ghazanchetzot in Shushi, which was in turn shelled, vandalized with graffiti, restored without its Armenian cupola, and now rebranded as a Christian temple. Since Azerbaijan's September military offensive 4 years ago, the 13th century monasteries of Dadivank in the Kelbajar district and Ganzasar, both magnificent and characteristic examples of medieval Armenian architecture, have already been rebranded as ancient Caucasian Albanian temples. As for the countless Armenian inscriptions on these buildings, khachkars, and tombstones, these, as President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev announced in February 2021, are Armenian forgeries and will be restored to their original appearance, quote unquote, presumably through gouging, sandblasting, removing of Armenian inscribed stones, as was done in the 1980s. Following the First Qarabakh War, the monastery of Ganzasar was renovated. So after the First Qarabakh War, when Ganzasar was under Armenian control, it was renovated and refurbished through the funding of Russia-based businessman and philanthropist Levon Karapetian. Restoration works, which lasted from 2000 to 2002, included the altar, the gavit, and the floor tiling. It remained under Armenian control after the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020, and in 2020, Armenian activists called for international monitoring of vulnerable sites in Nagorno-Karabakh by UNESCO and other organizations. Nothing happened, right? The Armenian Bar shared a very important report and still nothing happened. In early October 2023, a video was posted online showing Azerbaijani police inside the monastery. Around that same time, Azerbaijan's State Service of Cultural Heritage issued a statement that claimed that the Ganjasar Monastery is, quote, one of the most prominent monuments of Christian architecture of Caucasian Albania that had been, quote, vandalized while under Armenian control, and Azerbaijani historian Rizvan Huseynov claimed that the Armenian inscriptions had been falsified. Armenian archaeologist and historian Hamlet Petrosyan, really one of the most important sort of scholar activists in this field, and the organization Monument Watch responded to the claims. On October 9th, 2023, Armenia's representative to UNESCO, Christian Terstepanian, noted in his speech that Azerbaijan attempts to appropriate and distort the identity of Ganzasar, one of the most famous medieval Armenian monasteries. So this is all very depressing, right? And so what one starts to ask questions like, what does it mean to preserve Armenian cultural heritage in lands where, one, Armenians have been intentionally displaced and or killed, two, the history of Armenians having lived in that place is intentionally erased and or falsified by the government of said place, and three, how much space is there for actions on the part of non-state individuals, communal organizations, and non-governmental organizations for any sort of wiggle room? And four, another question is, what is the point of preserving Armenian architecture in hostile lands? Will Armenian structures be used for historical study, for worship? Is there any way in which we can imagine a preservation and a transformation of certain sites such that they might be preserved, recognized as Armenian, and used rather than destroyed? How might that work, and what might that look like? Sort of, this may seem counterintuitive, but I'm sort of looking to examples from the Republic of Turkey as an opportunity for potential modeling, even though we must always understand that the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Turkey have two very different approaches. They seem similar, but they are actually quite distinct with regard to Armenian cultural heritage, at least today. The eastern part of the current territory of the Republic of Turkey is obviously part of the ancestral homeland of the Armenians. Both during and after the Armenian genocide, Armenian cultural heritage was targeted for destruction by the Ottoman state and later by the government of the Republic of Turkey. Of the several thousand churches and monasteries, around 4,000 structures, according to historian Raymond Kevorkian, in the Ottoman Empire in 1914. Of those several thousand, today only a few hundred are still standing in some form within the borders of Turkey. Most of these are in danger of collapse. Those that continue to function are mainly in Istanbul and or in some other cities. Much of the properties formerly belonging to Armenians many of the properties formerly belonging to Armenians were confiscated by the Turkish government and turned into military posts, hospitals, schools, and prisons, and others were given away to individuals. The legal justification for this was part of the law of Envali Metruke, the law of abandoned properties, which legalized the confiscation of Armenian property if the owner did not return. Still, many Armenian structures in the Republic of Turkey were destroyed intentionally and over time by various arms of the government and or the military. The discourse on Armenian architectural heritage in Turkey is primarily focused on the structures themselves and seems to take place between various arms of the government of the Republic of Turkey, with occasional input from the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul. More recently, these conversations have expanded to include actors like the World Monuments Fund and other non-state actors like Anadolu Kültür that have been engaged in trying to preserve some of the Armenian architectural heritage in the Republic of Turkey and have broadened the conversation to include specialists in Armenian architecture from the Republic of Armenia and around the world. In fact, Christina has been very much involved in these projects, both in and around Ani and Kars, and also in Mush more recently. Probably you've heard of some of the restorations of churches in major cities, but the reality of the situation is that there are so many Armenian structures that dot the landscape, right, of central and eastern Anatolia in villages and places off the beaten path, and that the histories of these places are much more difficult to know simply because they are not in cities. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit here is, I'm going to get Skunk, which is sort of one example, but let's talk for Stuart Hall. Argued that culture does not consist of what the educated elites happen to fancy, such as classical music or the fine arts. It is simply, he said, experience lived, experience interpreted, experience defined. And it can tell us things about the world, he believed, that more traditional studies of politics or economics alone cannot. Hall's understanding of culture as lived, interpreted, defined experience, taken together with new readings of the work of Raphael Lemkin, opens a space for a reconsideration of the ways in which we might look at Armenian architectural heritage in the Republic of Turkey. Basically, the question I have is, how do people in Turkey, not the government, but how do people on the ground, specifically not living in large cities, how do they experience Armenian architecture? So in this case, I want to think about Khutskong or Beshkilise. So the remains of the monastic complex of Khutskong, known in Turkish as Beshkilise or Five Churches, are located outside the town of Digor, 25 kilometers southwest of Ani, 60 kilometers southwest of Kars. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the Armenian Bagratids constructed this complex around the same time that they founded the complexes of Marmashen, Sanahin, and Haghpat, which may be familiar to some of you, which are located today within the borders of the Republic of Armenia. These rural structures have been praised both for their architectural creativity, as well as for the aesthetic harmony that exists between them and their surrounding natural environments, most likely intended by their architects. What is left of Khutskonk sits in a large gorge, approximately 5 kilometers to the west of the town of Digor, and currently consists of the vestiges of the churches of Surp Asvadzazin, Holy Mother of God, Surp Grigor, St. Gregory the Illuminator, Surp Karapet, St. John the Forerunner, Surp Sarkis, and Surp Stepanos, as well as 2 khachkar or stone cross chapels that may have served as mausolea. The images of this destroyed Armenian pilgrimage complex are some of the most recognizable in any conversation on Armenian architectural heritage in Turkey, and yet the complex is rarely written about in its own right. Noting this gap in the scholarship, France-based Patrick Donabedian has discussed the complex, its architectural context, and its destruction in a recent article. His essay kind of represents a new jumping off point for academic contemplation of the site, as its long history has generally remained somewhat obscure, especially in comparison with the striking images that juxtapose its architectural grandeur with its obliteration. Like so many architectural sites in the Republic of Turkey, once Armenian populations from the Kars region were either massacred or deported, Khutskonk was deprived of the institution that had officially looked after it, the Armenian Church. The story of the destruction of this complex has been obscured. The region is known for earthquakes, and it's possible that seismic activity from the 1930s to 1988 could have affected the buildings at Khutskonk. Still, the majority of damage to the site seems to have taken place sometime between the early 1920s and 1959, when the site was visited by art historian Jean-Michel Thierry, who documented its destruction. Patrick Donabedian has outlined his thinking about the demolition. It seems, therefore, he writes, that we should consider the possibility of intentional destruction on a large scale. This, in turn, can be broken down into 2 hypotheses. The second is that the destruction by cannon fire during military exercises intentionally targeted the monastery. This assumes that artillery could have been transported to a site opposite Khutskonk or even directly near the monastery. That would be possible. Small caliber parts. The use of light could explain the gap having been completely destroyed. 2 shepherds walking their herd through the gorge, calling to their animals and singing, their voices echoing through the valley. One of the shepherds ran ahead and entered the semi-demolished Surp Sarkis and climbed up its interior walls and onto its roof. His partner joined him. They knew the structure like the backs of their hands, it seemed, as they maneuvered up through the crevices of the medieval church with relative ease and certain familiarity. Later that day, my working group from WMF and Anadolu Kültür went for lunch in downtown Digor. A banner hanging on a wall in the restaurant displayed an image of the half-destroyed church of Surp Sarkis, and the banner read, Digor's cultural platform, or Digor Kültürel Platformu. The group had been established in 2012 and still exists today. It offers cultural programming that is inclusive of both Turkish and Kurdish populations and creates links between the members of the larger Digor community, letting people know about illnesses, deaths, blood drives, and the like. While the mission of this group might be conventional, the fact that they use the image of the destroyed Surp Sarkis not only on a banner, but also as their logo on Facebook and Instagram pages suggests that the structure means something to people in Digor today. In the case of the complex of Khutskonk, since the local community uses the image as a symbol of its own cultural coalition, it seems possible that Khutskonk might have a local extra Armenian use and appreciation, perhaps within or beyond the framework of religious work. This use might have even been the 19th century, so we have almost all of the complexities surrounding this cultural site might have clashed with the official policies of the Republic of Turkey, especially considering how it views the Armenian structures within its borders. All of this could even be, in fact, part of the reason for the intentional destruction of the structures themselves. It is with these kinds of questions in mind, questions that suggest an importance in separating individuals from their governments and understanding the potential importance of various Armenian structures in rural areas in Turkey, that I would encourage we imagine new approaches related to the preservation of Armenian monuments there. Policies within which champions of Armenian cultural heritage, even the Armenian Church, might encourage the usage of Armenian buildings beyond uniquely those related to Armenian religious traditions and practices. Policies that might look toward a recognition of a particular structure as having been built by and for Armenian Christians with a long history of Armenian cultural and spiritual significance, but as potential sites of community or education, even as they were maybe originally envisioned. While this kind of approach might work in the Republic of Turkey today, more than 100 years after the Armenian genocide, it will still encounter a range of complications. With regard to cultural destruction and falsification of histories of Armenian monuments in the Republic of Azerbaijan, for now, the best things that thinking people who care about this situation can do are, one, learn more about what is happening through the various online resources available, specifically those provided by RAA, also those provided by Cultural Heritage Watch, and also those provided by Petrosian. Donate your time or money and scholarly attempting to document destruction and transformation. And three, build coalitions with other people and groups who are concerned with the cultural destruction of minoritized peoples in the world. Armenian culture has never existed in a vacuum of Armenianness, and to imagine that it does today would be a detriment to the cause of the preservation of such a fascinating and multifaceted cultural heritage and history. Mark, do I have time just to show a couple of images?
Yes, go ahead. And your video degenerated there a little bit here and there, Rachel, but I think you can go ahead and try it.
All right, let's see if I can share desktop. Okay, let's see. Where is it? Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are obviously, these should be familiar to most people. This is the cemetery of Jura. Before its destruction, here we actually have images from across the border of the Azeri military intentionally destroying khachkars there. This is kind of a before and after. Hyperallergic has been a terms of cultural heritage destruction. In case people are not familiar with it, Hyperallergic is an online arts magazine that is edited by Hrag Vartanian, and that was co-founded by Hrag Vartanian and Viken Geikian. Here we have Surpas Vadzadzin in Artsakh. This is an image from Caucasus Heritage Watch, sorry. Caucasus Heritage Watch is another very important resource if you're looking to be able to follow the destruction of architectural heritage in Karabakh in particular. It's run out of Cornell University, and it's spearheaded by Lori Khachaturian and her Adam T. Smith, both of whom are archaeologists at Cornell. They also are trying to expand their team to include, right now they have another individual working with them from Armenia. And they have an amazing satellite capacity to sort of to see the before and after from above. We can share that with you also, obviously. Ghazan Chetzots, Dadivank, Ganzasar. There is this report by the Armenian Bar Association, Report and Urgent Call to Action. We can make that available to people as well. These are some basic figures about churches and monasteries based on Kevorkian's book, The Armenian Genocide, A Complete Study. As we know, there have been some very public restorations here in the Republic of Turkey. Here's the Church of Akhdamar. Here we have Surp Giragos or Beshkhoran, restored, destroyed again, restored again. The WMF has done several projects. Also, this information is available online. The Ani in Context workshop, the entire pamphlet is available online, as is a booklet or book, really. And Christina has done so much of the work for this. You have on Mush as well. Here's the Surp Yerortutun Üç Horan in Malatya that was recently restored, and they had a Badarak there in 2021. This is, the most commonly seen image of Surp Sarkis at Khıtskong, the site I was talking about outside of Kars and Ani. Here's what it looked like in 1910. So you can see why it's called Five Churches, how gorgeous. And this is in 2013. You see the difference is, it's shocking, and it's oftentimes used to show how much has been destroyed. I mentioned architectural innovation. That's the umbrella dome, if you see. Yeah. This is an image by Marti Rosaryan, who sketched it, actually. He doesn't call it Khıtskong, but he calls it pilgrimage. These are the guys, the sheep herders. And here's the image of Surp Sarkis used Digor Kültür Platformu, used as a symbol of their cultural organization in Digor. Okay, I would like to share these links with people, so I will try to do that in the chat. Okay, thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, we do have some questions, which we'll just jump right into, and they aren't necessarily directed at any individual. So whomever feels best qualified can leap right in. I fear the answer to this question, first question, is all too clear, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What success has been registered in getting international organizations to halt this destruction? And I fear the answer is little or none. But if anyone cares to disabuse me of this, I would welcome it.
Rafi, maybe you can answer.
Ներողություն, չլսեցի հարցումը։
Հարցում եմ, որ որևէ աշխատանք տարվել է, որ ՅՈՒՆԵՍԿՕ-ի միջոցով destroyment-ը ոչնչացումների առաջ առնվի։ Դա պետական գործունեություն է, այո, ՅՈՒՆԵՍԿՕ-ին դիմվել է մի քանի անգամ, բայց ՅՈՒՆԵՍԿՕ-ին Ադրբեջանը ամեն անգամ թույլ չի տալիս ՅՈՒՆԵՍԿՕ-ի որևէ մի մասնակետի մտնել եւ այնտեղ կատարել այդ ստուգումներ։ Հետևաբար, այո, դիմումներ եղել են ՅՈՒՆԵՍԿՕ-ին, ՅՈՒՆԵՍԿՕ-ն նույնիսկ որոշումներ ունի, որ պետք է այցելի, բայց Ադրբեջանը տարիներ թույլ չի տալիս։
So there have been many, Rafi saying there have been many attempts to, or many, Timum, many, I can't think of
Okay, like a mission?
what?
A mission? Many.
No, like applications. There have been many applications to
Yes.
UNESCO. Huh?
Yeah, there have been many attempts. We've approached UNESCO multiple times in order to bring to the attention of everything that's going on. However, sadly, Azerbaijan continuously has stopped any UNESCO representatives entering the area. And so from a success perspective, registered success, there really has been none. We've certainly attempted. We continuously keep them aware of situations, but sadly unsuccessfully.
Not only RAA, but the government of Armenia and another organization, and they refused any mission.
Question is whether any of these cultural monuments in Artsakh were registered with UNESCO before their destruction or their current state, if that makes sense.
Registered in UNESCO?
Yeah.
No, because Artsakh was non-recognized government, and there is no anything about like that.
What is the current? I'm paraphrasing a question here. What is the current stance of the Armenian government regarding the cultural destruction and vandalism occurring in Azerbaijan? What steps is or is not the government taking in this regard, and what steps can the government take in this regard?
Միջազգային դատարանում կա որոշում, որ Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը ներկայացրել է այդ դատը, եւ որոշում կա, որ Ադրբեջանը պարտավոր է պահպանել հայկական հուշարձանները, որոնք գտնվում են իր տարածքում։ Այսինքն այդ որոշումը կա, բայց գործադրող Ադրբեջանը չի գործադրում եւ շարունակում է ավերել։ Եվ այդ դատը Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունն է ներկայացրել եւ այդպիսով նաեւ այդ դատի որոշումը կա։
I'm going to ask for a summary or translation. No?
Oh, I thought, Tallinn, do you want to?
Ռեչը պատասխանեցի, որ Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը դատարանում, այսինքն միջազգային արտադրության դատարանում ներկայացրել է հուշարձանների պահպանության խնդիրը եւ այսինքն Ադրբեջանի կողմից իրականացված վանդալիզմը եւ այնտեղ որոշում կա, որ Ադրբեջանը պետք է պաշտպանի հայկական հուշարձանները իր տարածքում, բայց գործադրող չկա, Ադրբեջանը շարունակում է իրականացնել այդ վանդալական գործողությունները։
So the Armenian government did open a case basically with the International Court of Justice, I guess. And there was a decision taken there that said Azerbaijan has got to stop destroying Armenian architectural heritage, but there's no one there stopping them. So they're just continuing basically. I think also like even, I don't know, Christina and I were involved in lots of conversations with lots of different international organizations on panels. People were always happy to listen, but no one could do anything. I mean, ultimately it gets to what Rafi said earlier, that basically like they're not allowing people inside unless, they're controlled in a way by the state. So there's no way to monitor even what's happened, let alone stop what's happening, which is in a way why Caucasus Heritage Watch is so important, because they're watching from satellites from above. It's the only sort of documentation that we have in real time.
Although there are resolutions not only from International Criminal Court, but also from the United Nations, but unfortunately there is no enforcement means, no strategy to enforce these resolutions. That's the main problem.
And I think it's also important to place this into a larger context. It's not that it's not, I mean, it feels as if like international global organizations, the international legal system are really letting Armenia down or Armenian people down. But ultimately, and this, you know, I have discussed before with Sarah Lee Whitson, who worked previously for Human Rights Watch, the international legal system seems to be failing or faltering in many different areas of the globe, right? So it's not uniquely happening to Armenians, right? This is something that it seems like international law is more and more difficult to enforce.
Does the Armenian Church have any legal standing here to claim these properties? And has there been any effort to use Azari law to protect Armenian cultural heritage? Is there anything within Azari law that could be used to protect these? I know there's no lawyers here, but
I mean, that's a very interesting question. I actually am a lawyer, and
excuse me.
no, that's fine, but that's actually very interesting. I don't know, I'm not familiar with Azeri law, so I can't really speak on that. But from a standing perspective, I think yes, that is actually very on point. There would be standing on behalf of you know, churches, prelacies, in order to kind of pursue any type of action. I think that would actually, I think that's a very poignant point.
I think this is also part of the reason why the Republic of Azerbaijan, they have already moved forward from that by trying to claim all of these as Caucasian Albanian, therefore taking away any potential political control that the Armenian Church could enforce, even without an Armenian. First of all, it's hard to enforce that without a population that's using a church or a site, but it's even more difficult when suddenly a church that was used by Armenians was actually just used by them and actually is Caucasian Albanian. So this is why you have like a fledgling, seemingly growing Caucasian Albanian community in Azerbaijan.
Well, this speaks exactly to the whole point of having a revisionist historical accounting of what is. I mean, really, all we ever know of anything is whatever is written, right? And perception can turn into reality. And so if you really start pushing for this narrative, right? This narrative that, oh, well, it was first Albanian, Armenians took it over and usurped it, and really, no, it's ours. You know, that's where it becomes muddled for people who are now turning and trying to understand what it is. So that's again why a lot of the work that you have all put in, and a lot of the work that has been done by you know, our organization, really, if I can take a minute to sorry, take it back to that, ends up becoming so important because I think there was a comment made in one of the chats that said, well, you know, these are just images, and, you know, what is the importance of an image without having more of a description to it? But an image is worth 1,000 words. And when you show, you know, the images, Rachel, Christina, that you showed, I mean, and I've looked at these pictures so many times that every time I see it, it breaks my heart, where you see how they are just wiping everything clean and taking it as their own. So,
yeah, is it? Sorry, please go ahead, Rafi.
The widespread nature of the act of vandalism suggests that there is an existence of a state-run vandalism program in Azerbaijan. And I think how the law of Azerbaijan will work in this case.
Yes. Is it fair to say, and maybe this touches on what you've just said, Rafi, and what Rachel was talking about, that the policy of Azerbaijan is in fact, not only is it far more radical than Turkey's current stance, certainly, but is it even more radical than Turkey's stance at any point that we are aware of?
I mean, I think so, but I don't know. I'm curious what other people think. I mean, and maybe it's just because the Armenian monuments in Turkey are, I mean, there's so many of them. But I mean, there are so many also in Karabakh. So I don't know. It does seem more violent to me. If you can imagine that something is more violent than literally attacking, 5 structures in the middle of a gorge with like shells and like, AK-47s or I don't know. So more violent than that, it seems. I'm curious what other people would say though.
Going to go to the whole aspect of white genocide, right? So how many ways can you destroy a civilization, right? There's what you just mentioned, attacking, brutally and sending shells. And then there's the wiping of a history. So you are perpetrating one on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. So it's this continuous cleansing, erasure. That's what it is, a complete continuance of this attempt, like Rafi said, that is kind of, as it appears to be, state-run.
I think there's another thing to say, which is changing technologies of destruction. So what was possible, in the early to mid 20th century is different from what's possible now with the, earth moving equipment, et cetera, et cetera. You can do things faster. And so that's probably another piece to this.
I think Azerbaijan is doing the same policy when Turkey does until 1950. They destroyed the big monuments, and then slowly they will come to the small ones. And Turkey does that process for 100 years, and Azerbaijan is doing that for only 30 years.
Have there been any studies, and this again may speak to points that you were discussing, Rachel, of I don't even know quite how to say this, but the impact on the local population, as in the Azeri. Obviously, it's too early to study this for the Azeri population, but for the Turkish population or populations in other places where there have been such thorough processes of cultural destruction. What is the impact on the people who continue to live there with the knowledge that these monuments exist or existed, and who created them? That's a very convoluted question, and I'm sorry, but maybe you know what I'm getting at.
I think there have been people talk about it, in different, like Christina, you have that co-authored article where I can't remember, I think it's a Georgian scholar. You guys just discuss a little bit the impact. I discuss a little bit in some of my work. In some other work, sort of on perceptions, like I think I put here, is it Tessa Hoffman? Yeah. Tessa Hoffman has an interesting, I don't know, I can't remember if it's a PhD thesis about Armenians in Turkey today. There's some discussion there, but I don't think there has been like an anthropological study. There are little pieces. I doubt that there's anything on Azerbaijan yet, but I think that it does have an impact. I mean, there have been art shows, for example, in Istanbul at one of Osman Kabala's galleries where individuals who live near the border and live near Ani have like all of these interesting dreams about Armenians, right? Because they live with their architecture. So there's someone should do an anthropological study on that, but no one has yet. And in terms of Azerbaijan, the mentality, I don't know. There are two very different mentalities. I mean, neither one of them, the official mentality of how individuals living in the Republic of Turkey or the Republic of Azerbaijan, it seems that the official line is, Armenians are not, obviously in Azerbaijan, are the actual enemy. In Turkey, they are disliked and not to be discussed. And, there's many swear words linked with Armenians, but they are two different mentalities. I mean, I know that there's a tendency in the Armenian communities to lump them together, but they are distinct. And it would be interesting to study that, from my perspective. But I'm curious what other people.
I mean, one should note too that there's a tendency among between Turkey and Azerbaijan themselves to proclaim that they are one nation, two states, which is on one level true. On the other hand, it does efface differences that you are referring to here. Let me try to end on this note, conflating a couple of questions. What are the ways that this is or can or should be broadened beyond an Armenian discussion to engage with scholars and activists outside of the Armenian realm? Because inevitably, I guess that's the bottom line, is taking this beyond the relatively narrow confines of the Armenian world. And some of you are doing that, and I would appreciate hearing you talk about that. I'll start with Christina.
Yeah, I mean, there has been work on that. There was a Change, the organization in New Jersey that concerning genocide did a cultural heritage program where a bunch of us were talking from various dimensions of cultural heritage destruction. And it was interesting to share stories and to compare methods of destruction, and in a way to kind of sympathize with each other. I mean, I'm struggling with the question, sort of, what do we do with that? So we put these scenarios or these sort of conditions of, people having their culture destroyed together. Yeah, maybe others can, again, beyond sort of sympathizing and with each other and sort of maybe comparing methods. I'm having a hard time coming up with, what you would do with it, but maybe I'm missing something.
You did a whole, remember your round table for this journal?
Yeah. Oh, that's true. We did do that. Yeah. How could I forget? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Talking about heritage in Turkey, different groups, culture, heritage preservation and destruction in Turkey. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, Rachel, what do you think?
I mean, I think one of the debates that seemed to come out that was interesting in the recent, like in the past 4 years, is this debate about extracting materials. Like, is it like, obviously, because there's this sense that khachkars, if they're left in Azerbaijan, will be destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Or manuscripts, if they spend enough time in the Republic of Turkey, they will go missing, right? Or whatever. So the question becomes like, is it ethical is the correct thing to do to take things out of a place to a place where they can be safe or not? Obviously, there are international legal issues with this, but as we mentioned earlier, international law, harder and harder to enforce, right? So I saw some very interesting debates about this between like archaeologists, for example, archaeologists who are seem very much to be of the mindset that things should stay where they are, even if they get destroyed, because it's the layer eventually that stays there. Whereas, for many, many people, that doesn't make any sense. Like if you have an opportunity to move things out of a place. So there are kind of conversations. I saw this conversation taking place specifically between people like Hernar Zeitlian-Wanpach, Christine Filiu, who studies primarily like Greek Ottoman history, and Ömür Harmanshah, who is an archaeologist at Chicago, or at University of Illinois, Chicago. So I saw these are interesting conversations, but oftentimes they end up sort of in the way that Christina said, like comparing I don't know, like basically competing for who's suffering more with regard to cultural heritage. You know what I mean? Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, the Syriacs, in this region, who has suffered more? And I don't know, in terms of productivity, what actually would help is the actual enforcement of international
Yeah.
law. Otherwise, I don't know.
I mean, I think maybe the thing to do is, and this addresses one of the comments in the chat, are there any sort of good models for how do you deal with this?
Mm.
You know, do we have any out there in the world, any good models for how to address this very problem? I mean, I don't know, but maybe there's something to learn there. And that might come out of, you know, talking across different, you know, cases. But that's not something I've thought about. But it's an interesting idea if there's such a case.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any models here.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the most difficult thing is kind of what you guys all mentioned is the fact that we have this bite, right? We can bite at things, but without teeth. So you're biting away and you're getting nowhere. But one thing, Christina, you mentioned as you were kind of going through the slides, and I think, again, that kind of really brought it home, I think, is the fact that when you kind of talk about all of this loss and all of this destruction in terms of what it means to the world when you're talking about a particular period of time. So when we talk about preservation, it's not, yes, of course, we want preservation of Armenian cultural heritage, but we're talking preservation to the world from a historical perspective that impacts everyone, not just us, right? If you don't have these things to look at, then how can you really understand a period of time and the impact that people had on architecture and architecture had on people?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I think, again, responding to someone in the chat, that academic scholarship has a role to play here. We have to do that work along with everything else. And I know that's something that Rachel also feels strongly about. And there is, you know, we all use the weapons we have, or if you want to call them weapons. And I think that there's still the possibility here of doing very good work using the documentation largely that RAA has provided to get somewhere towards an understanding of the cultural history and microhistories, if you like, of the regions that have been lost. So, and you know, with all this talk in the history of art and culture world of the global, there's, you know, this is an area that is desperately interesting and desperately you know, important to sort of bring into a larger, broader discussion of and I mean of scholars. So,
Well, what you're doing, you plural, thank you for that, and for making this book more accessible now as well, and the information that it contains. And I hope similar efforts will continue in the future. As you say, everyone does what they can with what they have, with the sense that so much more needs to be done. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening and that nothing is being accomplished. So truly, I thank you all for participating in this program. I thank RAA, Society for Armenian Studies, the Mashtots Chair, the Gulbenkian Foundation, and of course Nasser for coming together to organize this event. There is contact information that has been provided in the chat regarding RAA, how to support RAA, how to obtain more information about the organization. And if you don't get that information from the chat, there's this whole Google thing now, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it that way as well, or you can send us an email and we'll get you the information you need. Thank you so much for your time and for your great work, all of you. We will see you in the future. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Sure.